I feel like apologizing.
You and children, right?
I'd like to start with just a few of Roger's words. Tilda Swinton is fearless. She'll take on any role without her ego, paycheck, vanity, or career path playing a part. All that matters, apparently, is whether the movie interests her and whether she thinks she can do something interesting with the role. She almost always can. She hasn't often been more fascinating than in Julia, a nerve-wracking thriller with a twisty plot and startling realism. We have not seen this Tilda before, but then we haven't seen most of the Tildas before. This one is an alcoholic slut who lacks what we are pleased to call normal feminine emotions. I'll stop there. I want to start at the lacking normal feminine emotions.
Yeah. It's interesting because I had known Eric Zonker before we started making this film, before he approached me to make this film. But even before I met him, I had this desire to, in the first instance, make a film about an alcoholic who was as interesting as most of the alcoholics I know. You know, it seems there's a slight tendency in cinema to show alcoholics as kind of falling off the back of a lorry somehow in energy. And all the alcoholics I know are really fantastic people, literally, full of fantasy. And, you know, for better or worse, that fantasy seems to drive them. And I'd already had this idea before Eric came to me, and we started to talk about this woman who would we just wanted to set up endless roadblocks to her being kind to herself. And that meant being remotely nourishing. And so the idea of putting her with a child was too good really to miss. And by the way, that boy loved being thrown about. You know, 8-year-old boys really love that stuff. They do. I had one of my own at the time, and he was quite envious.
I do have to say that the portrayal of, I do know something about the world of alcoholic women and people getting sober and people who don't get sober, and you're right, there's a lot of frenetic energy that goes on. And I wanted to know, how did you get the portrayal of the Julia character? What did you do to study that world of the alcoholic woman?
Well, in the first instance, and I noticed it again, I haven't seen the film for a while, but seeing it again now, I see how important it was to make her lie at every possible turn. She tells the truth twice in the film. Twice. Once when she's speaking to the Nick character, when she says, "I'm frightened and I'm getting old." That's kind of one. And then at the end when she tells Santos the truth. She's not the mother, she doesn't give a shit about the kid, and go figure. And those are the only two moments when she tells the truth. And the rest of the time, I mean, I'm really impressed that she can just keep lying. Just, you know, on a turn of a sixpence, she's just making up another whole dream world. So that was a big starting point. The energy, the sort of battery of her intelligence, actually, and her fluency, and she never shuts up as well. That was important. You know, she never stops to think. She thinks with her mouth. It was exhausting.
Why? No, just curious. Why an American woman?
Well, I wish Eric Zonka were here to answer that question, because she was American before I came on board. There was a moment when what he wanted originally was to find a location for her. He wanted her to go into another world. And so there needed to be a border. She needed to crash through a border. I just love that she's this American who crashes through the wall into Mexico. For once, it's a good deal. For a while, she was going to be a variety of Europeans. But the truth is, the divide, the image and the sort of concept of the divide between North America, the United States and Mexico felt really tangible and more plastic in a way than any of the borders in Europe. So I think that's really why he started to think of her as an American.
Because there's a long tradition of French directors taking American thrillers and remaking them in France. But it takes some courage for a French director to come make an American thriller in the United States.
Well, he was, of course, inspired by Gloria, but in a very tangential way, in a sort of starter pack way. I think he was also inspired, as I was, by the Jean-Luc Godard, girl and a gun thing, just that as a start. Girl, gun, boy, Mexico, and a great love of Cassavetes. It doesn't take much to drum up Gloria, but we wanted to swing it off somewhere else.
I forgot, I hadn't seen this movie for a while, and in the beginning when I was introducing you and talking about your kindness and your empathy, I forgot where this movie takes you.
Me too. Yeah, that's when
and
I
then
apologize.
I remembered, Roger, one of the things that he likes, in addition to movies or characters that have kindness and empathy, are characters who are fearless. And when he was saying that you're fearless, your character is fearless, but a character that takes, but there has to be there has to be some sort of redemption, and of course there is redemption in the Julia character at the end, and she starts really caring about the boy to the point of giving up all of the money for it. The thing that I can't tell sometimes in a movie is when you are preparing to show the change, the arc that this character is taking, and the redemption, how do you prepare for that part to show that on the screen without really telegraphing it? It just...
I'm just thinking. Well, in the first instance, and again, this is very much on this reading, my own reading this time, I personally am very moved by how hard she fights against being empathetic. It's a real piece of work. She just does everything she can to be tougher, meaner, more acerbic, less humane. I mean, you can feel the little tendrils of humanity popping up in every scene, and she just stamps them down, and the energy that it takes for her to do that, I find very heartbreaking, and it takes more and more energy the more tired she gets, and the more drunk she is, and the more frightened she is, and the more completely out of control. And that I feel, that just the laying on of the tension, the feeling that she must break. She must break. Where is she going? What rabbit is she going to pull out of her hat next time? She's managed it again? How does that work? That feeling of the screw tightening and tightening and tightening. I think that was the real motor of it for me. And just, I don't know. I mean, honestly, it's not just that I can't remember any plan. I can't take credit for any plan in that sense. I think that we just played with the energy of it, even when we were shooting it. And then at the end, we knew that we were going to end up where we ended, but we never really knew how we were going to end up there. We wanted to make not just a film about an alcoholic, we wanted to make an alcoholic film. You're all going to have a hangover in the morning. We wanted to make a film that felt like, that puts the viewer into that state of lack of control and that sort of vertigo. And we as filmmakers were in that state as well, I have to say.
How scripted was it?
It was scripted, quite tightly scripted, actually. But honestly, at a certain point, quite early on, I realized that her motor mouth was going to have to be very important, and I just didn't learn my lines. So I was floundering, as she is, all the time to remember the scene. And I think that that's for real in the film. But it actually ended up being pretty much what was written.
Because it's a very convoluted plot. I still can't figure it all out.
Well, there is a 4-hour cut.
Is that, are you serious? Is there
This is the trailer.
Okay. Okay. We'll show that next year. Okay.
Until next year.
You know, film, of course, is a visual medium, but I can tell you that in this, the desperation of that character, I could smell the sweat pouring off of her. It was really one of the first times that I was watching a movie and felt like I could actually smell, that it engaged the sense of smell as well. There was one other movie that did that for me. I can't remember, Perfume.
Slightly different smell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about mirrors. There's a scene in here where you seem to use mirrors in several of your films. Michael Clayton is that famous scene. How do you do that?
That's really interesting, that question, because I notice it as well. And I think that it's something that both of those characters, Karen Crowder and Michael Clayton, and this character have in common, is that they're both really badly cast actresses playing parts that are way outside of their range and just making it up as they go along. And that moment with the mirror in both of the films is really, well, Julia has a couple of moments in the mirror, but there's the moments in the mirror for Karen Crowder also, that moment of kind of assembly and checking and re-approaching the role of playing Karen Crowder. I think that's why it feels like a useful moment to me. And yes, it's very repetitive, sorry, but I think it's for real.
It's extraordinary. I mean, to watch you watch yourself and pull yourself together or pull yourself into a particular state of mind.
Well, both of those characters are very isolated also, and they have their idea of themselves to go on, and nobody else, and nothing else, no other dialogue. And yeah, I think that I'm very fond also watching characters alone on screen. I like to see humans or animals just working out how to be in their own space, and humans who are acting outside of their own skin will need a mirror occasionally to kind of put it all back together again.
Did you find this a brave choice as far as a role is concerned? I mean, Roger seemed to imply that in his. I don't know that you think of things in those terms.
You see, I think when people say brave, they mean it possibly didn't work. but it didn't feel brave to me. It felt really kamikaze, which I suppose might look brave, but it's just kamikaze, really. It felt really exciting. It felt very different. At the time, it was a very different kind of energy that I'd played with for a while, and I really enjoyed it.
I do want to ask about working with a child, there were some things in, you know, some of the rules that I thought that you had to observe when working with a child in a movie, that I thought that certain of the language you say, I've seen some movies where you know the child is in another room when they're using certain language, or you can't hog tie them.
Or take them to
I
bed
never read
with you.
that book. As I say, that boy was, and is even more now, sophisticated to the nth, more sophisticated than any of us, and a real proper professional, certainly more professional than the rest of us. And he was up for all of it. But the language, you're right, I'd never even noticed that before. I was a little shocked this time. He wasn't somehow. He and his parents were down with all of it. And the hog tying, he loved it. He loved it. You know, tighter, tighter, again, again, again.
It doesn't sound like something a child should be saying.
It's got to start somewhere, Nate.
This role is, of course, the role, but the sometimes with an actor, when you see them in a role and it becomes sometimes it seems like they're playing the same, not the same character over again, but you see the same mannerisms, and I really don't. I see a big difference in your acting from, you know, Orlando to I Am Love to this character, and just a tremendous range. And I think that I heard you say once that you never took an acting class. Is that true?
No, and honestly, and every time I say this, it sounds like I'm making it up or I'm being disingenuous, but it's still true that I don't think of myself as an actor, and I never intended to be an actor. It's just dressing up and playing as far as I'm concerned, and it goes on being like that. And in a funny way, a role like Julia is even more that than something with a more sort of finely calibrated rhythm that's closer to my own rhythm. It really is no more sophisticated, in fact, less sophisticated than my children dressing up as an old lady and a dog. You know, it's just me, to a large extent, because this portrait really is quite far from my own rhythm. It has a more impersonation in it, I would say, than a lot of my work. But I kind of mix it in with a sort of fantasy of what I might be like if I was a roaring drunk. But it does have a more burlesque rhythm. I mean, I always think of myself, if I had to write the thing I would really feel best about writing on a passport, you know, if you had to write your profession anymore, I would probably say artist's model, stroke, clown. And those really, I do feel I can really, you know, I am Tilda, I am a clown. I can say that, that feels good to me. I feel better about saying that than saying I'm an actor. And that's kind of pulling that in a little.
Well, you're such a precise clown. I mean, no, I mean, there's never, even in this movie, there's not a wasted motion on your part. Everything has meaning, has significance, and it's minimalist, but yet it's not. And that's what I've always admired about your performances, is that you look like you know exactly what you're doing.
Well, then maybe I am an actress. Yeah, I really don't, I have to say. But thank you.
You say that you didn't set out to be an actor. How did you become an actor?
Well, originally, and I have to confess, I just remembered this today, Roger did an extraordinary thing to me once. The first time I met him in Chicago was when we were talking about a film I made with David Siegel and Scott McGehee called The Deep End. And yeah, I love that film, thank you. And I don't know what we were talking about. And we hadn't been talking for very long, and I'd never met him before. And he said to me, very strange. He said, I think you're a writer. And I felt so shocked and ashamed because I was a writer. And I had stopped writing. And I went to university as a writer, and I was always going to write, and I stopped writing. And then I started performing in plays in a very half-hearted way, really for the company, to be honest. Just because I knew some people who were having a lot of fun making plays, and I was at a university where there was no cinema course at all, so I was a little deprived. And then when I left university and I was doing a bit of acting, but not really wanting to act in the theatre, and I was just about to sort of fall off the edge of that and stop doing it completely, I met Derek Jarman. And Derek Jarman was such a, I mean, honestly, if I hadn't met him, I really don't think I would be working as a performer at all. And I certainly don't think I would be making cinema, because Derek Jarman was a really unique phenomenon, certainly in England at the time. I was living in London, and at that moment, in the middle of the 80s, I wanted to make films. I was always crazy to make film in any way. Not particularly as a performer. And there was at that time not really a cinema in the UK. There was a sort of, you know, there were some people who had come to America like Alan Parker and Richard Attenborough and people, and then there were the people like the Merchant Ivory people. But there wasn't really a cinema that I could really feel at home with, except Derek Jarman's world, which just embraced me, and I lived alongside him for I don't know what it was, something like 9 years. We made 7 films together. And for those who don't know Derek Jarman's work, I urge you to discover it. He sadly left us in 1994. He died of AIDS. But he was the most extraordinary cinema artist who worked entirely independently. He worked in 2 different ways. Partly, occasionally he would write a script, raise some money, and shoot it with 35mm. But most of the time, he was shooting with Super 8, way before digital. And he made a couple of feature films which were generated Super 8, blown up to 35mm, which I'm probably almost more proud of than anything. We ever did a film called The Last of England in 1989, and a film called The Garden a couple of years after that, which were autobiographical. I mean, truly experimental films. But at that moment, they were shown at really quite mainstream cinemas in the UK and given huge broadsheet slam reviews, but they were given a real attention. So he was an extraordinary man, and so I was able to sort of develop this very strange kind of performance. I mean, in the Super 8 films, of course, they're silent performances. That's closer to performance art than anything. That's another reason I find it so difficult to call myself an actor, because I wasn't acting anything. They were home movies to a certain extent. And I was able to sort of play in this kindergarten with him for 9 years, and then he died. And I was a bit up a gum tree, really, because I had worked for so long and still wasn't a professional. And then I just sort of kept on sliding sideways into relationships with filmmakers, and that on it goes. I'm not really doing anything different now.
When you've been working with someone, a particular filmmaker, for that long, how do you find the language and the rhythm to work with someone else after that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, in 1994, I really wondered whether I could work with anyone else, because we were, talk about language. I mean, by that stage, Derek and I, when we were working, we didn't even talk to each other at all. We just sort of grunted. I mean, when you have worked with somebody that long, you developed it together, and then you don't even need to talk while you're shooting. You just lift an eyebrow. And I was really fortunate after that filmmakers came forward, and by that stage, I suppose I had a semi-body of work, so they knew what they might be able to do with me. And so people came to me. I'm so grateful for that, because I don't know whether, I've never been one to go looking. I wouldn't know how to go looking for colleagues. They happily have come to me.
Let's take some questions from the audience.
I want one more thing before we go to the audience, because you talked about sort of performance art. And the last image that Roger saw of you in the hospital about, actually the last 2 weeks, I think maybe a few weeks ago, is he was so proud of you. He opened, like, we were looking at this article on, from the Museum of Modern Art, and he said, look, there's Tilda, she's living art. She's living, breathing art, because do you know what I'm talking about? She was in this glass coffin at the Museum of Modern Art, but it's nothing new. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then Roger tweeted it out to 850,000 people.
Yeah, who needs PR when you've got Roger Ebert? It's interesting because at the point that Derek Jarman died, and I was wondering if I could go on being a performer, I devised this performance piece called The Maybe, which I developed and made at the Serpentine Gallery in London in 1995. And the genesis of it really was a sort of question to myself. I was asking myself what I was going to do. Was I going to make work as an artist, or was I going to be an interpreter? Was I going to make cinema? Was I going to make live art? And I wanted to find a gesture that was a hybrid between or of the two things I most love about, the one thing I love most about live performance, which is that kinetic thing of everybody, like now, we're all in the room together and anything can happen, and you know, all our bits are in, you know, none of us are framed out, and time, of course, is with us. And then what I love most about cinema performance, which is that capacity to scrutinize a human, preferably, although it also works with donkeys, à la Bresson, who is unwatched, and particularly to be able to look in close up at an unwatched face. I love that so much. And so I came up with this gesture of a lying body, a figure sleeping, in fact, with eyes closed in a glass case. And so I made this piece in the Serpentine Gallery in London in 1995. It was also, it has to be said, very much inspired by my experience of the previous 2 years with not only Derek Jarman, but so many of my friends dying of AIDS and going to so many bedsides and seeing so many of my friends in coffins and thinking how wonderful it would be to sit with someone living. And it was a sort of gesture of mourning for them. And interestingly enough, the Museum of Modern Art have been restaging a series of historic performance art pieces. They did a big piece that Marina Abramovich had made several years ago, a couple of years ago at MoMA. And they asked me a few years ago to remake The Maybe, and I wanted to wait until the time was really right for me. I couldn't quite work out how to make it in somewhere as public, because it's believe it or not, because probably none of you have seen it, it's an incredibly modest and incredibly quiet piece. You know, not 1,000 million tweets notwithstanding, it's very modest. And so I decided eventually at MoMA to make it as a pop-up surprise performance. So there is no statement beyond what I'm saying to you now. There's no schedule, and MoMA have invited me to do it whenever I want for the perpetual future. And I might not do it again, and I might do it for the rest of my life. So watch this space.
I think this piece showed, for me, it informs one of the reasons that I think you give such great performances in your work. How long are you in that glass coffin?
7, well, in London and in Rome, it was 8 hours because the museums were open for 8 hours, but in MoMA, it's 7, because those are the opening hours.
Continuously, for 7 or 8 hours, you're there.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of patience and discipline, and probably a very big bladder.
Yeah, some sort of biologically advantaged in that way. So far. I mean, when I'm doing it when I'm 90, it might be different. I might be doing it for 30 minutes. Yeah, it's, I mean, you know, if and when you ever hear, and you're in New York, that I'm popping up again, it's a modest piece.
But the interesting thing, as you were saying earlier, is the technology today. I mean, you're in there, and immediately the whole world knows you're in there, whereas in 1995, that was not the case.
Yes, in 1995. I mean, we have issued no photographs. We have issued no statements and no schedule. And you wouldn't believe that, given the noise. But, yeah, it's, well, you know, it's social sculpture now. And believe it or not, people think that I performed there today. And they will probably tell you that I did, and that they saw me there tomorrow. It's all happening. It's still happening. It's in MoMA now, and it will be forever, popping up in different rooms, and people will tell you. When I made it on the day before yesterday, there was a woman who came who said she'd seen it 5 times, and it had...
Can you hear the people talking?
Well, I never talk about my experience.
Okay. We're very easy around here.
Yeah, it's anything anybody fantasizes. It's called the maybe. So, you know, it's just up to you to imagine what's going on.
Okay, I'll imagine, and let's have some questions from the audience. There are mic wranglers, so if you have a question, raise your hand. And
from the balcony, straight up here.
Hi, Tilda. My name is Genevieve. I'm with a group of people who are just huge fans of your work.
Hi, Genevieve.
Hi. So I wanted to ask you about the ending. It's such a blunt kind of knockout punch, which maybe seems fitting given the jaunty random ride that we've been going on throughout the film, but maybe not, because the beginning seems a lot more layered. You're swung around Julia's world. So I was wondering if you could tell anything about the decision to end the movie the way it was ended.
Well, it did. I agree with you. It's a punch, isn't it, when it ends? Although you can't believe you want more, but you sort of would like something a little softer. We always knew it was going to end there. We always knew it was going to end with that image of her walking away with the boy and saying to him, okay, we're going to find your mother. But truthfully, and I've told you already that there is a 4-hour version out there. Well, actually, it isn't out there, but rather like the maybe, it's in the ether. When we were looking for how to kind of cut the cloth of this film, I mean, we really wanted to make this character the basis of the film. And we could have cut, you know, 6 yards of it or 7 yards of it. We could have started anywhere. We could have ended anywhere. We could have gone on. I mean, I had this fantasy that actually, if you went on a few frames, she probably puts the boy down and says he's really heavy and starts looking for a drink and really regrets it. Maybe, why not? Or they go down and run a bar somewhere on the beach. I bet she's there. But no, that was always the end. Why it's so abrupt? I don't know. I don't know. I wonder if there's an ending that wouldn't feel abrupt. I mean, one's so exhausted by then. You sort of, you know, it has to end at some point. But no, that was always going to be the ending.
Another question?
Yes, right here, slightly to your left, in the center. Please stand.
I had a comment and a question. The comment is I really appreciate your portrayal of an alcoholic. Thought you did a great job of that. And the other question is James Bond in the building?
Is James Bond in the building?
Yes. James Bond is in the building.
Yes.
He is.
The one in the booth?
He's in the booth.
Or the one in London?
Our projectionist, James Bond, I'm assuming.
Sounds like a code.
We actually have a projectionist named James Bond.
Fantastic.
Oh, wait a minute. Unless there's some code to you.
Oh, there he is up in the...
Oh, there's
booth.
James Bond. Hi, James.
Hi, James.
Were you speaking of this James Bond or just speaking in code?
Were you telling us to acknowledge him, or do you have a message for him?
He's up there. Do you want us to semaphore a little message?
It's a long.
Next question.
It's a long walk up there.
It's right here in front.
Roger also tweeted about your David Bowie video.
Did he?
Yes, he said, David meet St. Tilda, St. Tilda meet David. I was wondering if you could say a few words about that video, because it is
Oh, well,
really cool.
that was a really nice start to the year, I tell you. I had this really bizarre experience. I will tell you, it was amazing. I was making a film with Wes Anderson, his new film, which is going to be extraordinary, which will come out sooner or later. We were shooting in Germany. And it was right at the beginning of the year. It was like the 7th of January, and we were talking about New Year's resolutions. And I said, you know, every year I decide that I'm going to meet David Bowie. I met him once very, very briefly, which he now tells me he can't remember, so it's like really disappointing. But anyway, I wanted to meet him again. And a couple of years ago, I'd written him this letter, because a friend of a friend of a friend said that they knew him. Wrote in this letter, said, look, another year is coming, and I really would love to meet you. And he never replied, so I thought, okay, it's flat. So I was talking to Wes, and I said, do you know him? And he said, no, but I'd love to. And we shook hands, and we said, okay, this year we're going to meet him. We're going to stalk him and find him on the street. I don't know. And just that, we're just going to meet him. And and then I went to bed, and the next morning I flew away on a holiday that I'd not had for 5 years. And I got out of the plane, I went and had a swim, I got out of the sea, and there was an email saying that David Bowie wanted to call me. And about 3 hours later, my phone rang, and it was David Bowie on the phone. So there you go. The handshake worked. Yeah, no, amazing, amazing. And Floria Sigismondi, who is really like out there. It was like making a feature film. So yeah, I was really, really happy with that.
I would love to see you two and the man and the woman who fell to earth, playing brother and sister.
From the balcony.
Hi, Tilda. I wanted to say that I'm glad you mentioned the deep end and that this performance was probably my favorite. I've never seen it before. It was incredible. I didn't recognize you in the first
you
scene.
say the nicest things.
Oh, it was just amazing. And I thought you looked the most comfortable, and you always do an incredible job. Also, your interview on Charlie Rose was so sweet. Oh. It was really nice. You shared all of your ideas about life. And I wondered if this is a terrible thing to do to you when you're on stage, but are you looking at any new scripts?
I will be, I suppose, at some point. At the moment, I'm having a really, I want to say a nice year. I mean, honestly, my mother died a few months ago, 3 months ago, and so I'm having a bit of a year like that. So I'm not reading anything at the moment, but sooner or later I will. Thank you for asking.
Do you have anything that's not been released yet?
Yes, I do, actually. There is a film that I made, which I'm really looking forward to coming out, with Bong Joon-ho, the Korean filmmaker, who made Mother and The Host and Memories of Murder. And it's a film that we made last year, which it's coming out in the summer, I think. I can't exactly remember when. But that's going to be quite extraordinary.
What is it called?
It's called Snowpiercer. It's based on a graphic novel, a French graphic novel called Transpierce-Neige. And it's a sort of, I don't know, I'm very bad at these sound bites. What is it? It's a kind of fable, a sort of not post-apocalyptic, but it's about a train. The earth is covered in ice. The powers that be, in order to combat global warming, released a gas before it was tested, and it froze everything, of course. And so now there's another ice age, and there's this mad, evil genius, well, not so much evil, but anyway, a mad genius, who has invented this perpetual railway that goes round the world endlessly, and has been doing this for 18 years. And, of course, it's an allegory for society, because this train, like all society seems to have a bad habit of doing, is classified into first class, second class, third class, whatever, and the tail section, which is like the worst kind of slave ship, and it's about revolution. And it's going to be rocking. I guarantee it, really rocking. And Bong Joon-ho is beyond, absolutely beyond filmmaker. And also, I'm very happy to say that Jim Jarmusch, finally, we've been planning it for about 8 years, we made our vampire film, which I don't know when that will be unleashed, but that's also really exciting.
Directly in front of you, center house.
Okay, first the American accent, and then second the backstory is the front story. I mean, she's an alcoholic, but the refusal of tenderness.
Well, exactly. I mean, it was really important to not ever be tempted to, you know, bring out the violin and imply some tortuous relationship with a mother or a father or an uncle or any of that. It was so important to not do that and to keep the tip of the iceberg and only imply. I mean, I'm just as much an interpreter as any of you who hadn't seen it before. I'm watching it just now and going, God, that's so interesting. The way, you know, she talks to him about a loving mother. When, you know, that moment when they're on the mountain and she's making up all this nonsense about Elena being a fabulous mother. And you sort of think, where did that fantasy come from in Julia? Why is she going on and on about this glorious mother? What's her story? What's her mother? I don't know. I don't know any more than you do, but we really wanted to not indicate any of that, but just keep it all open. And we did that by keeping her fighting. You know, she never really relents. But my American accent, again, I apologize.
It's very good. Do you like watching yourself? I was watching you watch yourself, and you seem to be enjoying yourself.
Well, I do love this film, I have to say, and it does amuse me. I find it really sick and funny, and I find those gangsters so funny. They're great clowns, all of them. I mean, that scene in that awful dungeon when we're all shouting at each other, they're brilliant, those guys. And no, it does make me laugh.
Where did that take place? Was that it? Was that?
That was not a set. I mean, that was for real. That was Tijuana, Mexicali and Tijuana and Mexico City. And that building that's all, you know, she comes out the lift and it's all smashed down. That was Mexico City.
But do people actually live there?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't make that. In fact, I feel very guilty because there was one elevator in that building and we broke it. The crew, you know, all the dollies coming up on something, and there were all these ladies waiting with all their shopping, you know, and we mended it eventually, but, you know, it was a real location.
Why don't we take one last question?
Right here in front.
I was wondering if you could talk more about your time with Derek Jarman, maybe making those types of movies in England in the 80s, the kind of culture surrounding it, just experience in general, exhibition-wise and everything encompassing, yeah.
I'd be happy to. It's interesting, of course, we've all been thinking about those days more than usually recently because Margaret Thatcher dying has reminded us all of that climate. It was such a particular time, and all the triumphalism about Margaret Thatcher dying has sort of pinched some people's feet in their shoes around the edges. But I remember it with a strange nostalgia, to be really honest with you, not just because of my personal experience working with those people, but also because there was a culture at that time. We had a kind of funding for a kind of art cinema that just doesn't exist anymore. There was this body called the BFI, the British Film Institute, and the production arm of the BFI just went out of its way to take an artist and say, I will give you, like Derek Jarman or Sally Potter or Isaac Julian or Ron Peck or any manner of other people who I'll remember in a second, Peter Greenaway, and say, we'll give you £200,000, but we'll give you £200,000 for your next 5 films. We will be with you while you develop as an artist. And Derek benefited very much from that stable. And it was really run originally by a man called Peter Sainsbury, who then went to Australia and ran the Australian Film Institute and brought on Jane Campion, for example. So that was a cultural phenomenon, and we all thought it was going to go on forever. And, you know, times changed a little bit. And as far as I know, that culture, of course things morph, but that culture doesn't exist as such in the UK. I say as far as I know because I haven't worked in the UK for a very long time. What's the last piece of work I made in the UK? Well, I made a Scottish film called Young Adam, but I haven't worked in that kind of funding structure for a long time. I think a lot of the filmmakers from that time are now making fine art. People like Kerith Wynne Evans and John Maybury and Isaac Julian, they're making installation art. And a lot of people, of course, are finding new ways of distributing their work through online channels, and it's all changed. It's all up for grabs. But what's for sure is that there was a very dark decade, at least, when the BFI was folded, and it was all run by the lottery money. And in order to get lottery money, you had to. There was actually a clause which said, you know, spell out in so many words how you can prove that your film will make a profit. You know, and I always joked, but it wasn't really a joke, that a filmmaker would maybe make one feature film on, you know, his parents' loans and a credit card, and then graduate to making commercials. And that's really the culture at the time. I wouldn't want to, you know, say with authority that I don't have the authority to say that it's still the same in the UK, but I don't, that certainly that sense of patronage and security and encouragement isn't there anymore. Everybody's on their own, yeah.
And it's the same here as well.
But, you know, evolution. I really believe in evolution. I just think people just need to find. The only thing we need to fear is people just stopping trying. You know, I always say there's never any shortage of filmmakers. There's, you know, as many filmmakers as we want, but the important thing is to get them out from behind their barista jobs. Get them making films. They're just all there. They're just all working in McDonald's. So, but people do find ways of just encouraging themselves, and, you know, on it will roll. And these huge budget films crashing. I mean, I'm not one for Schadenfreude, but it does help a little bit.
I'm curious, do you still do your traveling cinema, play,
Festival's
the word, yes. No, but it's not really a festival, it's a mad thing. I will say that we started making film festivals in Scotland, and we haven't made one in Scotland for a while, but I've been doing them in different places. I made one in Thailand on an island last year, and we're going to make another adventure at some point in the Indian Ocean later this year, and we will make another Scottish one. But we were talking about features of those film festivals, and one feature that I remember Roger loved to hear me talk about was that in our film festivals, we always have a lot of music and dancing. And we were talking at dinner just before this screening about this, and Chaz was really hot to get us to dance before this screening. And we were trying to fix up an iPod to play some Barry White. And we were going to do it, but there was some technical thing. So maybe before the screening in the morning, we'll bring our Scottish Film Festival vibe, and we'll all dance in the aisles.
So come prepared to dance with Tilda tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much.